New York who was so, oops. Stop right there.
Don't want to make it a matter of public comment.
Right.
I'll have PETA all over me.
Okay, Ms. Greenwood, you can open the meeting and I'll take roll once you start the meeting.
Okay. I am going to open the wait, where did it go? I have to find the, there we go. Sorry, the agenda had been set aside in the very special place that I set aside things that I cannot immediately re-find. Okay, I am reopening the Public-Private Equity Committee. Linda, would you take roll one more time, please?
Yes. Ms. Greenwood?
I am here.
Thank you. Mr. Knox?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Here.
Okay, and Mr. Green left the meeting, so we can continue.
All
Mr. Kelly's
right.
here. Mr.
Oh,
Kelly's
I'm
here.
so sorry. Mr. Kelly
Ms. Sanchez is here.
and
Yes.
Mrs. Jones.
Yes, here.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Sanchez, and Mrs. Jones are also attending the meeting.
Thank you
Okay,
for
and-
acknowledging us.
Do we have any staff that we want to identify so that everybody knows who's in the room?
Let me see.
We don't have to.
Okay.
Never mind. We are on item 4, which is the consent item. And Mr. Rice, do we need to discuss that again?
No, in fact, since we recessed in the middle of the meeting and the board has now taken action for itself and the committees, there's no need to take action on the consent item.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'm going to move to the non-consent item. And I believe that is Esmeralda de Bosque.
Yes, thank you, Chair Greenwood. Good morning again, Chair Greenwood and members of the committee. At the January board meeting, the Global Equity team provided an update on its latest emerging manager program search. In conclusion of that search, no managers were recommended. And at that meeting, we noted that staff would work with Makita to review our experience and examine ways to refine the program for future success. Now, as a reminder, the goal for LACERA's emerging manager program per the policy is to hire managers that enhance total fund risk-adjusted return by hiring smaller, promising managers. And the second goal is to promote those promising managers as they grow with LACERA. Today, we want to walk through a 2-part presentation reviewing our analysis and next steps. Part 1, led by Magdalia and Ron, will cover the modifications made to the Equity Emerging Manager program to date, as well as the suggested path forward. And in part 2, Jeff will present the resulting recommendation. Now, at a high level, over the last few years, the team has made refinements to the program approach, all in the spirit of broadening the opportunity set of prospective respondents. However, in our last 2 emerging manager searches, we received what I call more of the same type of mandates that are already well established within the global equity portfolio. Staff and Makita, we came up with a joint solution to move the program forward, and that is to use discretionary separate account manager to construct a customized portfolio and who can develop emerging managers that may be graduated over time. With that, I will turn it over to Magdalia, who will launch into the deep dive of part 1.
Great, thank you, Esme. And thank you, Shelley, for running the slides. So let's go ahead and go to slide 4, please. Thank you. So we'll start off by providing a summary of global equity and the allocation to the emerging manager program. You can see here, global equity accounts for approximately 2/3 of the growth functional asset class. And when we break that down, we have approximately 62% in passive, 21% in factor-based, and between these 2 allocations, we get beta exposure. And the 18% in active is where we look for excess return. The emerging manager program is a subset of the active sleeve, which can be up to 5% of global equity. Now, the Emerging Manager Program is a great opportunity to pursue alpha-seeking strategies that diversify the portfolio. We'll cover some examples later in a short moment. The current allocation to the Emerging Manager Program is to one manager with approximately 85 million and accounts to approximately 0.3%. So now we'll go over the history of the program. And so we already touched on the objective and background. So let's go ahead and go to slide 6, please. Thank you. So as we look over the timeline here, it's important to remind ourselves of the evolution and the path that has been taken and how today's program has been informed by our prior experience. So starting with version 1.0, the Emerging Manager Program was established in the 90s as a fund of funds program, and it was US large cap focused. And since it was allocated to a more efficient area of the market, it experienced performance obstacles that ultimately led to its dissolution. Version 2.0 of the program is when the program went direct. And the decision for that was to open up the program to a wider opportunity set, for example, include non-US strategies. 2 searches were conducted during version 2.0 and modifications were made, as was mentioned, to broaden the universe of candidates. So the first search in 2018, 3 small cap managers were hired. And then the search in 2021, despite having no performance hurdle, the search yielded no higher recommendations. And some of the trends that we continue to see were manager candidates that correlated highly with LACERA's current management program, which leads us to version 3.0 on the next slide. So after numerous discussions between staff and Nikita on LACERA's collective experience, a viable path forward is a discretionary separate account manager. Version 3.0 can help us overcome some of the shortcomings that we've encountered so far. A discretionary separate account manager closely aligns with LACERA's initiative to optimize the investment model. And in addition, when seeking a manager that can provide a custom solution offering differentiated sources of alpha, provide a robust pipeline of emerging managers, and be able to develop and mentor these firms in a way to help them become established and eventually graduate them. All these things align nicely with the Emerging Manager Program goals. So with that, I'll now hand it over to Ron to finish part 1 of the presentation.
Thanks, Magdalia. Highlighted on this page are some examples of equity-based strategies that could diversify the global equity portfolio. However, we will work with the discretionary separate account manager to further develop the list. Next slide, please. Thanks. In EMP version 3.0, what we are seeking is a manager that not only has a proven track record and has experience constructing portfolios and creating value, but one that can also source firms that align with LACERA's strategic initiatives. The discretionary separate account manager will source and hire managers based on LACERA's guidelines and parameters. Other key competencies include the ability to source and provide a robust pipeline of newer investment firms, extensive operational due diligence experience, and importantly, the ability to pursue favorable fee economics and secure capacity for future LACERA investments. Next slide, please. This slide covers program implementation and the anticipated separate account manager structure. Depending on the strategies proposed, we expect a lineup of around 5 to 10 managers. As for sample emerging manager parameters, we are looking for independently owned emerging manager firms that are at least 51% employee owned. Firm AUM may be less than 5 billion, and we have a preference for newer firms and early stage mandates. Next slide, please. Slide 11 touches on our observations and considerations. On the left-hand side of the page, I will highlight the key observations. First, a discretionary separate account manager would have resources such as dedicated manager research teams and maintain a robust pipeline of new firms. Second is operational due diligence expertise, which would help mitigate business risk for LACERA and assist with manager development. Third, they would be able to ramp up the program and fund managers faster based on their dedicated firm resources and experience in sourcing new firms. For the fourth and fifth observations, LACERA would maintain beneficial rights through a separate account mandate and maintain oversight through program parameters. On the right-hand side of the page, we have highlighted some of the considerations we will keep in mind as we craft the program guidelines. These include portfolio risk exposures, program benchmark, fee terms and future capacity, and manager graduation or progression. Next slide, please. Slide 12 has our summary assessment of our past experience and proposal for path forward. Magdalia's review of the emerging manager timeline walked us through EMP version 1.0 and version 2.0 and highlighted the challenge we experienced in the prior two searches, which is candidate managers had similar exposures to existing global equity mandates. Version 3.0 can fix that shortcoming and help us move away from more of the same types of strategies. Adapting a custom discretionary separate account manager approach is a viable path forward for the following reasons. One, it would provide us the opportunity to invest in niche strategies that capture differentiated sources of risk and return. We would ensure consistency with LACERA's total fund strategic initiatives, including ESG, TIDE, and the emerging manager program policy. And three, we can lean on the separate account manager's resources to ramp up the program faster and increase the likelihood for graduation for emerging firms through mentorship and manager development. Makeda concurs with staff's analysis. Their memo is attached. I will now hand over the presentation to Jeff to discuss the second part of our presentation, which is the search recommendation and minimum qualification for the discretionary separate account manager.
Great. Yaron, why don't we move to next slide, Shelley? So today's recommendation is for the committee to advance the proposed minimum qualifications, evaluation criteria, and scope of work to the BOI for approval. I'll cover each of these in more details in the next slide. Next page. This is an overview for the search. If approved, we will run a search for a discretionary separate account manager that is tailored to LACERA's emerging manager program parameters. Approximately 5% of the total global equity portfolio will be allocated to one or multiple separate account managers, depending on their qualifications. And we'll be looking for managers that align with the objective of providing differentiated sources of alpha, as well as align with LACERA's policies and initiatives, including diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Next slide. The evaluation process follows LACERA's standard search procedures. The evaluation team and process are listed here on this slide. The team will present the search findings, scores, and recommendations to the committee and the board for final selection. Next slide. So this is our proposed search timeline. If approved, the search will be launched in May. Evaluation of the responses would take place from June to September, and the recommendation is expected to be presented in October of this year. Next slide. So here are the proposed minimum qualifications for the RFP, some of which should be very familiar. I'll note the items that are tailored for this search. Item 4 specifies that the firm must have at least 2 billion asset under management in emerging manager mandates. Item 5 requires that the firm must have at least 2 institutional emerging manager program clients, with at least 1 client with asset size of more than 5 billion. And lastly, item 6 imposes a performance track record requirement of at least 3 years. Next slide. So these are the evaluation criteria, which will consist of 6 areas shown on the slides. These are similar to previous searches, but with emphasis on experience with emerging manager program construction. Next slide. This slide shows the scope of work to be provided. This ensures that the RFP respondents will provide services that adhere to LACERA's policies and expectations. These include sourcing and selecting high-quality emerging managers and constructing programs within LACERA's parameters. So in conclusion, a viable path forward using a discretionary separate account manager that aligns with LACERA's initiative and may resolve the shortcomings of version 2.0. We recommend that the committee advance the proposed search criteria outlined in part 2 of our presentation to the board for approval. And again, Makita's support memo is attached as attachment B. This completes our presentation and we're happy to answer any questions.
Sorry about that. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Nobody's speaking and I don't see any in the chat room. I would just like to thank staff for their for an outstanding presentation and for your continued efforts to move this forward. It is incredibly important that we bring emerging managers into the fold if we can. And I think what you're doing is outstanding.
Ms. Greenwood, Ms. Jones has a question.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I share in Ms. Greenwood's enthusiasm about this. I'm very excited as well. I just had a quick question on, I think this is slide number 10. There's a bullet point that says that we will preference newer firms, typically less than 10 years. And I was just curious of the rationale behind that. Is there how is this advantageous?
Thank you, Trustee Jones. I think from our past history, we've had emerging manager firms that have been, before the criteria was based on AUM alone. And so you had firms that had been around for a long time, that have been around 20 or 30 years. And these are not necessarily emerging firms, but managers that have been around a long time. So with the preference for newer firms, we're actually getting into the new firms and fresh mandates and strategies that are newer and could potentially diversify our global equity portfolio.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, does this need, it does. Do I have a motion regarding sending this to the Board of Investments?
I will move to approve staff recommendations.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you both. Who was it that moved? I'm sorry.
Keith.
Thank you, Keith. All right, Linda.
Ms. Greenwood.
Calling for the, aye.
Okay. Mr. Knox.
Aye.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Great. I think next is staff. Do we have any?
We don't have any staff action items.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good.
Does anybody want to add anything to good of the order? All right. Thank you guys for making my first chairing event such a rousing success. And I hope you all have a great week. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you all.
Great job. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.